Welcome back, everybody, to another Q&A with Dr. J. We have lined up some really fun Q&As because what's not to love about food? And this whole series is going to be on food and things that might surprise you about the connection between your genes and food. So, Dr. J, I know you have a passion for talking about
Food.
sulfur-related food. Sulfur foods, which might be eggs, onions, garlic, that kind of stuff, all the things we love. Like I've just made an omelet in my head. Maybe not the garlic so much. I'd put the garlic in the salsa and put that on top of the omelet, but definitely onions and some cheese. So tell me about why that isn't a great idea for everybody.
There's a lot in the literature that says onions and garlics are great for your immune system, and they're supposed to be very beneficial foods when they are for most people. But if you have a genetic variant in the sulfur transferase gene, the SULT, and you can look that up on your My Happy Genes report and see if you have it, but it can cause the sulfurs that build up from those foods because they're all high in sulfur, eggs, onions, and garlic, especially. There are other foods that have sulfurs in them, including wine, and some fermented food has sulfurs in it as well. Fruits that are dried will have sulfur.
Mm.
There are medications that have sulfur. But if you do have that genetic variant, it can cause a backup of the sulfur, and that causes some really interesting symptoms, some things you wouldn't necessarily connect with sulfur issues. One of them is itching. I've seen this with a few of my patients have this itch that's under the skin and they just scratch themselves raw and they can't figure it out. It's not a rash on the outside, but they describe it as it feels like it's under the skin. That's a sulfur problem. And sure enough, when we balance that sulfur gene with the right nutrients, that goes away really quickly. The other symptom is a cough, like a tickle cough,
Hmm.
where you can't figure it out. It's like not an infection. They've done all the tests to see if they have any kind of like infection or an allergy. Nothing. It's that dry cough, and it's just maddening for certain people. And I've seen people that have had it for years. That can be a symptom of sulfur. So when they cut out those foods, but also take the right nutrients to balance that sulfur transferase gene or the SUOX gene too, it goes away like very quickly. A third symptom is gas and bloating. It just depends on where it's going to hit you, whether it's in the skin, whether it's in the lungs, whether it's in the digestive system. It can cause leaky gut, but it can cause all this gas and bloating and discomfort in the digestive system. So it's a fascinating thing to link that all up to genetics and sulfur.
And I would say it's a great thing to have your genetics because those symptoms sound like about 8 different possible issues, right? If you had
Yeah.
dysbiosis, you would have gut problems. If you had some kind of histamine thing, you might have the itchiness. You talk about whack-a-mole medicine. In the case where you don't have genes to refer to, that's basically what a doctor is left with.
Yeah, absolutely. It can be maddening to practitioners too. They try all kinds of topical creams for that itch and nothing works. My mother had it and it took me a while to figure it out. I began to research and do testing on her and we got her genes tested and found that sulfur transferase gene. I was like, oh my gosh, this makes sense. And we started giving her the right nutrient there and boom, it was gone within a couple days.
So the only medication that I'm allergic to is sulfa, which
Yeah.
I didn't realize is a sulfur-based medication. And for me, it was wheezing and hard breathing and that kind of thing. And then, of course, when I got my genes tested, I'm not like in the red, but I have to be careful with those kind of foods.
Yeah. And it's again, it's easy to fix. But one thing you can do is if you have some of those symptoms, try cutting out those foods and
Hmm.
see for a week, let's say, and see if you don't feel a difference.
Yeah.
And also take a look at your genetic report when you get it and see if you have that genetic variant in those enzymes.
I think the sulfur in dried fruits is because that's what they use to soften, to keep them soft. Is that right?
I think it's more of a preservative.
Preservative, right?
Yeah.
Because I've had unsulfured dried fruit and it's like hard as, I don't know, dried out leather, really not easy to eat. So it must be that it
But
softens and
maybe both.
preserves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't eat sulfured fruit. I tend to stay away from it just on principle.
Yeah.
And the wines, you can buy wines
Mhm.
that don't have added sulfurs because the sulfites are just a naturally occurring product of fermentation of grapes, right? But they also add more sulfur to it as a preservative, but you can get some
Yeah.
that's no added
Right.
sulfites.
Yeah. So again, for people that don't know this, your genes don't change, but with the understanding of where your gene variations are and targeted supplementation, you can live without the negative impact of that variation.
And that's again the key, because in practice for so many years I would tell people, all right, cut out the eggs, cut out the garlic, cut out the onions, and they'd be like, okay, and they'll do it for a little while and then they'll go right back to it, and it's maddening. So I started going, all right, what do we need? What nutrient can counteract those foods so that you can at least have some without having a reaction? And that's where we found the answers to those questions and found the right nutrients to just neutralize the effects of the sulfurs. So that's the nutrigenomic piece of this. And that is, I consider it to be one of the most important pieces, because human nature, we're at a party and we go, oh, I want some of this good
Deviled
stuff.
eggs. I want deviled eggs.
Deviled eggs, yeah, or good garlic pizza or whatever. Garlic is everywhere. It kind of sneaks in. You can handle it much better if you supplement correctly to balance that out. So that's the nutrigenomic piece of what we do with My Happy Genes.
Excellent. And I think that probably is all we can say about sulfur foods and nutrition or nutrients. You have to get that gene test report done with My Happy Genes, because I've had a couple of other gene tests just to try and see how their reports were compared to ours. And there's nobody that says definitively that this will align your biochemistry or repair the broken biochemistry. They say you might do well with taking B6. You might do well with apple cider vinegar. But why? What is that relation, right? So your reports are very much, this is the relationship that this has to this. That's why we're asking you to try this.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, very cool. All right, people, if you have something that you would like us to do a Q&A on, you know the drill. Please leave it in the comments below the YouTube video, and we'll be back very soon with another episode of the Q&As on food. Thanks, Dr. J.
Thanks, GC.